Grand Palace clock had barely ticked past the hour when a single devastating communique jolted the nation. In just 7 minutes, what had once been hushed whispers behind the opulent palace doors exploded into an unfathomable public tragedy. Imagine this: the world's most watched family, the royal family, suddenly faced with a crisis that not only threatened their future but their very existence. It's a situation so tragic, so shocking, that it could change the monarchy forever. What happened next would captivate millions. The monarchy does not confirm tragic news unless it has no choice. It has survived scandals, betrayals, separations, and national outrage, always managing to keep it under wraps. The royal family has weathered storms that could topple governments, all while maintaining an unwavering facade of composure and control. But when they finally break their silence like this, it's not just significant, it's a sign that the truth is already slipping through their fingers. It's not coming from the polished speeches or carefully orchestrated statements. It's coming through the cracks, leaked by insiders, murmured by staff, and whispered by those who can no longer keep the burden of secrecy. Within minutes, every major newsroom across the globe shifted into crisis mode. The typical rhythm of royal coverage, measured, calm, and steady, was now replaced by chaos. Producers who hadn't contacted their sources in years began making frantic calls. Correspondents who once operated in calm, deliberate tones now rushed to gather information, speaking faster, walking faster, and refusing to go on record. The question wasn't if something had happened, it was how bad was it and how long had they known. The statement from the palace had come out of nowhere, but it collided with something people had already started to notice, something offbeat, unsettling, and ultimately incongruent with the image the monarchy had carefully curated. Hours earlier, Catherine had been seen leaving Kensington Palace, but there was something different in her demeanor that day. Instead of walking with her usual poise, she had seemed unsteady. Her face, typically a mask of grace and composure, now looked unfamiliar, haggard, distant, almost haunted. Her eyes weren't simply tired, they were hollow, as though a part of her had been irreparably shattered. Those closest to the royal household knew something was wrong. The calm, almost mechanical formation of staff that normally flanked Catherine was absent. The usual choreography of royal appearances, the serene procession of aides, advisors, and assistants was missing. The perfectly polished routine that had long defined the public image of the royal family had suddenly slipped. The crack in the facade was so loud, it felt like it reverberated throughout the palace, echoing through its grand halls. And that's when the whispers began to grow louder. Speculation swirled. Some believed it was a medical emergency, an illness that had arrived without warning, forcing doctors into immediate action. Others believed it was an accident, something so unpredictable, so chaotic, that the palace had no time to prepare, no time to craft a controlled narrative. But the most terrifying theory of all was that this was not an isolated event. This wasn't something that had happened overnight. No, this was a secret, a long-buried secret, that the palace had fought desperately to contain for months, if not years. And now that secret was breaking free, spilling into the open for all the world to see. The monarchy doesn't confirm tragic news unless it absolutely has to, and in this case they had no choice. The news was already leaking through insiders, through staff, and through whispers that had been growing louder and louder. The royal family had learned the hard way that some things cannot be hidden forever, and once a secret begins to slip, there's no stopping it. The announcement itself was short, cold, and controlled. But within those few brief sentences lay the weight of an entire institution's carefully crafted illusion. The monarchy had never used the term tragic news lightly. These words were reserved for the rarest of circumstances, moments so severe that they could not be softened or ignored. The weight of those words carried a sense of finality, a message that the monarchy couldn't spin or manipulate. And while the statement was a calculated attempt to maintain control, it became clear that the world wasn't buying it. The public wasn't calm, they weren't reassured, they were terrified. The reaction was immediate. Social media exploded, and the hashtag #PrayForLouis began to trend faster than anyone had anticipated. People weren't just expressing sympathy, they were expressing fear. Fear for the young prince, fear for the royal family, and fear of the unknown. Parents and grandparents rewatched every public appearance Louis had made, searching for clues, reading between the lines. Was he quieter? Unusual in that video? Was he more tired? Did that smile seem forced? Everyone suddenly became an amateur detective, not because they sought drama, but because something felt deeply wrong. Something didn't match up with the calm image the monarchy had projected for years. And at the heart of it all stood Catherine, not the future queen, not the royal icon, not the carefully crafted, polished figure that the public adored. No, at that moment she was simply a mother facing the unimaginable. If this tragic news was as serious as it seemed, Catherine wasn't crying for the cameras. She wasn't shedding tears for the benefit of the public eye. She was crying because something was happening to her child, and the palace knew that soon the world would know too. Behind the palace's controlled, measured release lay a dark secret, one that the monarchy had worked tirelessly to bury. For years, Catherine had worn her signature smile like armor, but behind that perfect, radiant exterior was a mother grappling with a storm of fear and worry, a storm that no amount of royal training could prepare her for. Few people knew about the secret hospital visits, the quiet consultations, and the whispered discussions. Fewer still knew of the fear behind her protective gaze, the dread that had built up over months of uncertainty. From Louis's earliest milestones, subtle signs had emerged: delays in speech, issues with motor coordination, and an increasing number of quiet suggestions from royal nannies about seeking further evaluations. But Catherine, ever the attentive mother, had noticed what others had dismissed. Behind closed doors, she had already taken action. She arranged for secret visits to specialized clinics, had international experts flown in under aliases, and scheduled neurological assessments and developmental screenings. What had appeared to the public as a normal, lively royal upbringing was, in fact, overshadowed by an ever-growing concern that Catherine kept to herself. Catherine knew that this wasn't just a precaution, it was a desperation masked by royal composure. She refused to let anyone else take charge of Louis's health. While royal aides and staff would typically handle every detail of a royal's medical care, Catherine insisted on being there for every appointment, every test, and every moment. Her schedule was quietly adjusted, engagements subtly cancelled, but through it all, her smile never wavered. To those in her inner circle, it became clear that this wasn't just a minor concern, it was something much deeper, a crisis of unimaginable proportions. But Catherine refused to let the palace's institutional control overtake her role as a mother. It wasn't just about keeping Louis's diagnosis private, it was about protecting him from the very institution she had pledged her life to. The monarchy had no place for imperfection, especially in its heirs. Catherine's refusal to allow the royal machine to take over was both a quiet rebellion and a desperate act of love. She believed with all her heart that her son deserved a life free from the expectations of royalty, a life that wasn't defined by his diagnosis, one where he could just be Louis. But as much as Catherine tried to shield Louis from the pressure of royal life, the truth could not be contained forever, and when that truth finally broke free, it shattered the royal facade. Louis's collapse, though occurring far from the public eye, would be the catalyst that set everything in motion. What had once been a private battle would soon become the focus of the world. The royal family, once so adept at controlling the narrative, found themselves completely unprepared for the storm that had broken loose. The carefully constructed image of perfection was crumbling, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The monarchy had always walked a delicate tightrope, carefully managing its image, its narrative, and its public life. But this was different. This was no ordinary royal concern that could be smoothed over with a well-crafted press release or a strategically timed appearance. Catherine's quiet rebellion to maintain control of Louis's health, to shield him from the overwhelming weight of royal expectations, had brought her to a breaking point. In her eyes, this wasn't just about her son's health, it was about preserving his humanity in a system that had no place for imperfection. For all her training, all her poise, Catherine was a mother first, and her love for Louis wasn't something that could be concealed by royal duties. Even as her outward composure remained flawless, those within the royal circle could see that Catherine was becoming increasingly undone. She was trying to hold it all together, trying to protect her son, but it was impossible to ignore the strain. The palace's walls, once thick with control, were beginning to crack. While Catherine worked in the shadows to manage her son's diagnosis, others whispered about the mounting prise. Sure, the monarchy, always keen on maintaining a certain image, had no choice but to come to terms with the fact that the truth was no longer something they could keep locked away. When the palace finally acknowledged the situation, it wasn't just a revelation of illness, it was a dismantling of the perfect image the royal family had worked so hard to construct. And it wasn't just Catherine who had been affected. As the royal family's deepest secret began to seep into the public domain, the response from the world was nothing short of overwhelming. The hashtag #PrayForLouis was just the beginning. Media outlets, royal experts, and even longtime supporters of the monarchy had to face the uncomfortable reality that the royal family had been keeping a secret far more personal, far more tragic than anyone had anticipated. It was no longer just about the institution, it was about the real, human side of Catherine and her family. Louis had been the darling of the royal family, a symbol of hope and joy for the future. His every appearance, his every wave to the cameras had been met with adoration, yet beneath the surface, things were different. Catherine had always been protective of her children, but her love for Louis had become a quiet act of defiance against the system that demanded perfection. There was no place in the royal family for an heir who wasn't physically and mentally perfect. And so Catherine had kept the diagnosis hidden, hoping against hope that Louis's struggles would resolve on their own. But as the months went by, the reality became clearer. This wasn't something that could be easily swept under the rug. The illness, whatever it was taking hold, and Catherine couldn't escape the gravity of the situation any longer. Behind closed doors, she had been struggling not just with the fear of Louis's condition, but with the weight of the monarchy itself. The palace, which had always been a bastion of control and precision, was now grappling with a crisis that couldn't be controlled. The palace's attempts to shield the public from the truth only seemed to fuel the fire. The more they tried to hide, the more the whispers grew louder. Every sighting of Catherine, every moment of vulnerability, only added fuel to the growing inferno. And when the truth finally emerged, it was too much for the royal family to keep up the charade any longer. For Catherine, this was more than a royal crisis, it was a personal battle. She was fighting for her son's future, for his well-being, and for the right to be seen as a mother first, without the heavy expectations of her title hanging over her every decision. But the world was watching, and the weight of public scrutiny, combined with the royal family's need to preserve its image, meant that there was no space for Catherine to mourn, no space for her to process what was happening to her child without being under the harsh glare of the media spotlight. As the palace issued their statement, the reaction was swift and unrelenting. The world wanted answers. The public wanted to know why Louis's struggles had been hidden, why Catherine had been forced to carry this burden in secret. The palace's statement, while carefully worded, did little to assuage the mounting fears. What was the nature of Louis's condition? What did this mean for the future of the royal family? Would Catherine be able to carry the weight of this tragedy, or would it tear the royal family apart? Catherine, as always, stood at the heart of it all. But now she stood not as the future queen, not as the poised figurehead the public had come to know, but as a mother overwhelmed by a crisis that none of her royal training could prepare her for. The walls that had once kept the monarchy's secrets intact were beginning to crumble, and in their wake, Catherine was left standing exposed, vulnerable, raw, and utterly powerless against the forces that had been unleashed. And as the world watched, the question on everyone's mind was not just about Louis's future, but about the future of the monarchy itself. Could it survive the truth, or would the weight of that truth prove to be too much for even the royal family to bear? The minutes stretched into hours as the royal family waited for word on Louis's condition. Inside the sterile walls of the hospital, the air felt thick with fear. No one spoke much. What could be said in such a moment? Catherine, who had always been a beacon of composure, looked fragile, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. Every so often she would stand, pacing like a lioness trapped in a cage, her eyes darting toward the door, praying for some sign, some word that Louis would be okay. She had always been the rock, the pillar of the family, the woman who carried the weight of royal responsibility with grace. But now, in this moment, that same poise seemed to have crumbled under the pressure of a mother's love for her son. William, though outwardly more composed, was a man torn between his duties as a prince and his unyielding devotion as a father. His eyes were red, his movements stiff with tension, yet every time he spoke to his wife, his voice betrayed his vulnerability. He was not the future king right now. He was simply a father who feared for his child's life, a father who had been helpless in the face of something so uncontrollable. He looked at Catherine, searching her face for some form of strength, but found only the same storm he felt brewing within himself. There was no escape. And so they waited. The tension in the room was so palpable, it seemed to press on the very air they breathed. The medical team moved in and out with the professionalism expected in these high-stakes situations, but even they couldn't fully mask their own concern. The news that Louis had collapsed had sent shockwaves through the royal network, but it wasn't until he was rushed to the hospital that the true depth of the crisis became clear. No one had prepared for this. They had all lived under the illusion that Louis's condition could be managed privately, hidden from the world that had always been so eager to pry into their lives. But now it was out there. The royal family had been forced to confront a truth they had spent years trying to keep buried. The very idea that something was seriously wrong with their youngest child had always seemed too much to bear. The secrecy surrounding Louis's condition was never a decision made lightly. It was born of necessity. Catherine, fiercely protective, had always wanted to shield her son from the suffocating glare of the media. She wanted Louis to grow up with the freedom to be a child, to play, to laugh, to live without the burden of being the royal child with a hidden condition. But now, with Louis's collapse, that illusion of privacy had been shattered. And so, as the press swarmed outside, the royal family's secret began to unravel. The carefully orchestrated narrative of a perfect royal family began to slip through their fingers. As the hours passed, the world outside grew frantic. News outlets scrambled to report anything they could, no matter how inconclusive. The hashtag #PrayForLouis became a rallying cry for millions who followed the royal family's every move, but the sentiment was driven by something deeper than sympathy. It was fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what had been hidden for so long, and fear of the truth that was now beginning to surface. Inside the hospital, the surgery continued, and as the clock ticked, Catherine couldn't stop herself from praying silently. She had always believed in the power of love, the strength that a mother's devotion could offer. But this time she wasn't sure if love alone could save her son. She wasn't sure if anything could. The doctors had done everything they could to reassure her, but the cold reality was that Louis's condition was not something they had ever fully understood. Every specialist they'd consulted had offered a different theory, a different prognosis, but none of them had an answer that felt like a resolution. Catherine had never been able to shake the feeling that Louis's future had always been uncertain, that the calm smile he often wore had hidden a deeper struggle. William sat beside her, his hand firmly holding hers. Though he had always been the strong one in their relationship, the pillar of stability, even he was beginning to show cracks. The moment Louis collapsed, the world that William had spent so long trying to control had slipped out of his grasp. No royal training could have prepared him for the vulnerability that now consumed him. There was no strategy to employ, no political maneuvering to be done. This was something more personal, more raw than anything he had ever encountered. "Do you think he'll be all right?" Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," William replied, his voice breaking slightly despite his efforts to maintain composure. "But I'll be with him. We both will. He's strong, Catherine, he's strong." But as the words left his lips, both knew they were merely comforting each other with something they desperately wanted to believe. Strength alone might not be enough, and even as they clung to their hope, they both knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. Meanwhile, Charles, as head of the monarchy, had spent years trying to navigate the intricacies of royal duty. He had built his legacy on an understanding of the weight of tradition, of the monarchy's central role in maintaining national stability. Yet here he was, facing a dilemma that transcended all of that. It wasn't a political crisis he could contain. It wasn't a public relations issue to be handled with carefully crafted statements and controlled media coverage. This was a life-altering event for his family, one that would fundamentally change the course of history for the British monarchy. In the end, Charles knew there was no going back. The secret was Aula. Out, the palace, once a fortress of control, was no longer able to conceal the truth. The delicate balance they had worked so hard to maintain was crumbling under the weight of Louis's condition. The decision to keep his diagnosis hidden from the world, though well-intentioned, had ultimately led them to this breaking point. The reality of royal life, with all its limitations and expectations, had collided head-on with the very personal, very human crisis that no one had anticipated. As the news spread, the royal family began to brace themselves for what was to come. The press would not let up. The public, once enamored with their every move, now found themselves questioning everything they had been told. The monarchy, an institution that had survived centuries of scandal, betrayal, and public scrutiny, now faced its greatest test yet. And in the center of it all, Louis, who had been blissfully unaware of the weight of his family's secrets, was fighting for his life, the world holding its breath along with his parents. The royal family had always stood for tradition and stability, but when the heart of the monarchy is threatened, how do they fight back? How far are they willing to go to protect their own? What do you think will happen to Louis and the royal family now? Will they stand together, or will this tragedy tear them apart? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe for more updates on the royal family's journey. This story is just beginning, and we'll be here every step of the way to bring you the latest news and insights. If you want to hear more about this shocking story and other royal updates, hit the subscribe button and stay tuned. Also, comment below with your thoughts on how Catherine and William should handle this crisis. We want to hear from you.